Now is that vote social development stand part of the schedules. I call Sue Moroney.
Well, thank you, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak on the estimates debate for vote social development. And Mr Chair, I want to start at the beginning, which is around child poverty, because inequality is growing in this country, and New Zealanders are very clear about that. The government can carp and wail and moan and cry their crocodile tears about it, as they do, but the reality is that the vast majority of New Zealanders, when asked the question about whether inequality was growing in this country, said yes, it is. And that is because that's what they see day in and day out in their own communities, and they're not going to be fooled by a government who, first of all, says inequality isn't growing, and then secondly, refuses to actually even measure child poverty, for example. So I think the country feels very let down by the government when it comes to social development, because the government seems completely out of touch with the impact of its own policies. And I say that because the government has had some deliberate policies that have grown inequality. Take, for example, their tax cuts right at the height of a global recession. Who would have thought that tax cuts favouring the wealthy would have been the best thing that a government could come up with in the midst, as we were heading into the midst of a global recession? But that is nonetheless what the national government did. And who can be surprised then, having done that inequality is in fact growing? And the place that it causes New Zealanders the greatest discomfort to see that inequality growing is when the number of children in poverty grow in this country, as they have done under this national government. So here we are in a food-producing nation, in actually a very wealthy society, a country that has great resources, a good level of wealth, and 27% of our children live in poverty. 27% of our children, that's more than one in four. More than 1 in 4 of our children live in poverty. Now, John Key may well be relaxed about that. He may shrug his shoulders, crack a grin, crack one of his jokes. But on this side of the House and in the Labour Party, we are not relaxed with having 27% of our children in this country living in poverty. We are not okay with that, and we are not going to stand by and just watch that continue to happen. So in the vote estimates for social development, you'd think having 27% of our children in poverty would have been an issue that would concern the government, and that they would have had some measure, any measure at all, in their budget to address this issue. But, Mr Chair, there was not one measure, not a single measure in the estimates, in the budget, to help address child poverty. There was no move to improve, create jobs. There was no move in the estimates to increase families' incomes. There was no move in the government's estimates to actually help families out in this regard. And so we saw no measures to address this particular issue. On this side of the House, what we've seen is a Labour Party who's prepared to lead on addressing this issue. We're not going to pretend it doesn't exist, and we are not going to put our heads in the sand, and we are not going to demonstrate how out of touch we are like that government does day in, day out when they pretend that this isn't going on. Because people out there in New Zealand see it in their communities, and they know it is indeed going on. So in the Labour Party, we've said we're going to do something about it. We have a Best Start payment that we have announced. This is a policy from the incoming Labour-led government. What that will do, Mr Chair, is ensure that all families, well, actually almost all families, up to 150,000 coming into the household a year, if there is a newborn child in that family, they will get $60 a week. And that will apply for all of those families over and above when they are not actually getting paid parental leave as well. So families will get an entitlement to paid parental leave, and in fact, under the Labour Party plan, they will get an extended entitlement to paid parental leave. They will get 26 weeks paid parental leave, and then they will get the $60 a week payment. Mr Chair.
Sue Moroney.
But for low and modest income families, it's even better, because that $60 a week payment will continue until that child's third birthday. And that, Mr Speaker, is a measure that will reduce child poverty. It will reduce child poverty, but it will also give some help to those families who are really struggling on a week-to-week basis to make ends meet, because their power keeps going up, and their housing costs are going up, and their wages are not going up under this government. And so, Mr Speaker, that is a very practical solution to a problem that I think is a shame for our country. I feel ashamed that in a country with the wealth of the nature that New Zealand has, that we allow 27% of our children to live in poverty. That is not okay. John Key's relaxed about it. We are not. Mr Chair, I want to go on to talk about another area in social development, because the government seems to be very boastful about getting people off benefits. And they would have something to boast about if people were going off benefits into jobs. But the most recent quarterly data shows that of all the people who came off benefits in the quarter ending March 2014, only 36% of them went off benefit into work. Only 36% of them. In other words, 64% of them stopped receiving a benefit, but they didn't get a job. And I'm challenging the government to tell us what is happening with the rest of those people. Because under this government, they have actually put in laws that for the first time in my living history mean that people who miss an appointment with work and income, or for some reason cannot turn up to a seminar, because that seminar might be 40 kilometres away from where they live and there's no public transport, they get cut off the benefit. If they have children, they have dependent children, they get their benefit cut in half. Now, I want to know from the Minister what is happening to those thousands of New Zealanders who are suffering that fate. Because if we talk about child poverty, that's going to be a big driver of increasing child poverty in this country. What I do know is that since the welfare reforms have come into being, 4,328 people, as at the end of March 2014, had failed these obligations and therefore ended up with no income. No income whatsoever for 13 weeks. Mr Chair, I think the Minister of Social Development owes the country an explanation about what is happening to those people. Where are they going? How are they paying the rent? How are they paying their power bills? Where are they living? How are they eating? Because suddenly they have no income. No income at all for 13 weeks and perhaps longer. And the Minister, when I asked her about this in Select Committee, said she didn't want to know. She said that people weren't required to tell her and she had no interest in knowing. I think that's an appalling indictment on a minister who calls herself the Minister for Social Development. Because if we don't know what's happening to those people, if these rules, new laws have come into place, the national government has changed these laws, they have a responsibility to know what is happening to those people. Because this is another area that is driving inequality in our country. Mr Chair, the figures that I just quoted don't even tell us the figures of people who have children who have had their benefits halved under these measures. We don't know yet what that number is, but I'm very concerned about that. Mr Chair, the other figure that I'm concerned about is that since September 2013 and March 2014, we've had a 64% increase in the number of people who are coming off a benefit because they are going to Australia. Actually, I don't know it's Australia. but I do know that they are going overseas. They're leaving New Zealand. They are giving up in droves, looking for jobs here, and so they are cancelling their benefit because they've gone to live somewhere else. Probably they've gone to Australia to look for work there. A 64% increase in the number of people doing that.
The Honourable Chester Borrows.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's my pleasure to take a call in the appropriations debate with respect to social welfare, and I'd like to start by congratulating my friend and colleague, the Honourable